The kind of discussions that happen at this conference really opens your eyes to a lot of innovations that are presently happening in our country in the financial inclusion space. I think it's a wonderful occasion for all of us to come together.
Hi, it's great to be here at the Inclusive India Summit 2019 in actually bringing big drive into financial inclusion in India.
The kind of discussions that happen at this conference really opens your eyes to a lot of innovations that are presently happening in our country in the financial inclusion space. I think it's a wonderful occasion for all of us to come together.
Hi, it's great to be here at the Inclusive India Summit 2019 in actually bringing big drive into financial inclusion in India.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth webinar being organized by Access as part of the Inclusive Finance India webinar series. This webinar is curated in partnership with our long-term partner, LEAD at Kriya University. I appreciate their partnership for several years and also for this webinar. Among other challenges, of course, the lockdown brought into focus the plight of migrant workers like never before. Loss of livelihoods, income irregularity and uncertainty. All of this has increased financial stress of migrant labor. The Government of India revealed that 10.4 migrant workers went home, mostly to rural areas. And a recent LSE study found that 52% of urban workers went without work or pay and received no financial assistance for over a month. And on an average, earnings fell by 48% in April and May compared to the pre-pandemic months of Jan and Feb. And financial assistance was available to less than 25% of the workforce. The large-scale reverse migration has obviously negatively impacted the scale and flow of domestic remittances. The World Bank estimates that remittances will drop by 20% because of the pandemic, causing hardship to more than 800 million people depending on the remittances mostly for their subsistence. Any approach to build resilience of informal migrants will require us to understand how they have been dealing with and coping with this unprecedented crisis. And through this webinar, COVID-19 and migrant remittances, emerging trends and strategies to build resilience, we aim to deliberate on strategies to improve and build migrant resilience through data-backed trends and insights. We have a group of eminent panelists with us who will discuss strategies to better capture data, understand the trends in remittances, and explore opportunities to improve the design of financial products that target the migrant population. It's my privilege to introduce the panelists of this afternoon, Mr. Ishwaran Venkateshwaran, Interim MD and CEO and COO of India Post Payments Bank, Dr. Sona Mitra, Principal Economist at iWage, Mr. Varun Agarwal, Founder and Lead of India Migration Now, and Ms. Sucharita Mukherjee, Co-Founder and CEO, Calidofin. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. Fabrizio Valenti, Head Financial Inclusion, Lead at CREA University. We are grateful for this panel for agreeing to our request to join the discussion today, and I'm positive that this will be an insightful and forward-looking discussion. I request Fabrizio to take over from this point, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. And I just want to reiterate how grateful I am and how grateful LEAD is as an organization to Access for organizing this webinar, and to all the panelists for joining us today. It is a great panel, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Also, as a reminder, this webinar is also part of the Financial Inclusion Week that is being held all over the world, with events happening at the same time across multiple countries. So just to give a bit of a global flair to a discussion that though is going to mostly focus on in the Indian context, and specifically domestic migrants. Now, I don't have to remind anybody about the gravity of the situation that we are going through. The pandemic has been naturally of an event of an unprecedented dimensions, and as Radhika was mentioning, we all witnessed the plight of hundreds of thousands of migrants that had to leave their place of work and take a very long and arduous journey back home, facing deprivations, challenges, hazards all over the route. At the same time, though, there is another phenomenon that it's often overlooked because it's definitely less visible. Actually, I would say it's completely invisible. That is a very large number of migrants that were planning to migrate after the pandemic struck did not. And while this obviously did not result in the dramatic images that we've seen of people having to walk hundreds of kilometers to go back home, the magnitude and the effect on the livelihoods and the financial well-being of these migrants and their families, it's as significant. Both these migrants, the migrants that had to go back home and the migrants that did not migrate, ended up having their whole financial plan for the year, their whole livelihoods completely thrown off. So that's where we are going to focus today with this discussion on. We're going to talk about strategies that migrants have taken up to cope with the situations and their households as well. We're going to talk about trends that we've been observing in remittances and the flow of remittances going or stopping to go from the migrants to their houses, but also from their households to the migrants, because an interesting phenomenon that has happened and has been observed during this period is this phenomenon of reverse migration, but also reverse remittances. If a migrant was stuck at their place of work and was not working anymore, what happened was that their households back home were starting to send them money to help them cope with the situation. And just to add a little bit more context, I think that it's clear to everybody how this topic is of tremendous importance at a micro level for the livelihoods of these migrants. But remittances, and this is old data, very dated data, domestic remittances in India are estimated to account for $10 billion US. So that is a gigantic amount. It's a very important amount. You close the tap on that amount of money, or the flow of money going around the country. You can see that it's not just a a micro issue of livelihood and economic and well-being of migrants and their households. It's also a macro issue of economic recovery, getting migrants to go back to work and getting migrants to go back to sending remittances back home. It's an issue of a political economy that affects, GDP growth and recovery at a large scale. So, without further ado, I would like to begin this conversation from a larger perspective. So, Varun, you are as the founder and lead of India Migration Now, you've studied migration and the issue of migrants, day in and day out. It's your bread and butter, and even before migrants came to the public attention as much as they did in this period. So I just wanted to hear from you, from what you observed now in the past few months. What are the strategies that you see in migrants, as going back to the objectives of this call? What are the strategies that migrants and their families have adopted to cope with the loss of income and drop in remittances? And if you can tell us more about the story of the migrants that did not migrate, and what can be done? I know these are a lot of questions, but what can be done to facilitate the resumption of work for these migrants and resume the flow of remittances, especially by the financial sector? So over to you, Varun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fabrizio, and thank you to the Access team for organizing this panel and having me. Yeah, indeed, it's a broad question, and you're right. It is our bread and butter, India Migration Now, to focus on migrants. But I'd like to say it's not just. I think what's relevant, coming from our background is not just about understanding migrants, but also building interventions in the financial space for them. So for us, that intersection, places us well to respond to this. So let me just begin by sort of giving kind of a sort of the macro story of how we see things. I think what we saw during the crisis, during the lockdown since late March, is an exacerbated version of what has been happening in India for a long time in terms of migrant lives. And I think the point to start off, and I think what we all sort of need to appreciate, is that internal migration, especially long-term interstate migration, is a good thing. It's a key feature of almost every country's developmental process. It's something that alleviates poverty successfully. It's been shown again and again in different countries, in different contexts. It is something that decreases the economic disparities between different regions of a country. Between a Bihar and a Kerala, nothing will reduce disparity more than migration and the remittances they send back, right? And so I think this macro truth, almost a stylized fact, needs to be appreciated. And from a household perspective, it's a especially long-term interstate migration, right? That's a wholly profitable endeavor, a net profitable endeavor. There are costs to migration, there are benefits to migration, but we know for a fact rural areas and urban areas, if you differentiate wages, it's almost quadruple. You can quadruple your wages going to urban areas, working in the same sectors. If you work, the jobs in urban areas are more abundant, so you can do more overtime work. They're more aspirational, and they're more lucrative, right? So the question is, but at the same time, what studies have demonstrated is that if you compare India's long-term interstate sort of migration levels with other countries at the same stage of development, we actually have very low levels of migration. So the question that sort of underpins our work and our interventions is, why don't more people migrate if it's such a beneficial thing, right? Why don't more people in India migrate compared to, let's say, other countries like China, like US in the 19th century, like Korea, like Mexico? Like, why are more people not migrating and sending back remittances in the process, right? And I think this is the heart of the problem. And like I said, it underpins, this inquiry underpins our research, our advocacy, understanding why that is the case. Now, some things are prima facie, like our cities are exclusionary. Housing is a major issue. Our especially state government policies, but in general, our policies are either apathetic or work with the assumption that migration is something that needs to be stopped, that needs to be prevented. There's this rhetoric that we need to do development where people come from that will somehow stop migration. Whereas If you look at migration studies and the facts of migration, more development leads to more migration. So there are certain assumptions we make about in our public policies, right? And finally, even in our dynamic sort of private sector, in our interactions with financial service providers in the last 2-3 years, not enough people are thinking about migrants as customers, right? Beyond remittances. Some people think about remittances, but we'll talk about remittances. But I think there's going to be a lot more we can do looking at them as customers. And so I think when we try to understand the COVID crisis and the responses to that crisis, we need to keep this perspective in mind, right? And you're right, the visible face was those frightened, penniless people walking back, who are heroes to their households, to their villages, walking back with zero in their hand. That was the image of the COVID crisis. But the invisible, the larger problem was the people who didn't migrate, thus exacerbating this larger problem that I've been trying to sort of explain. So so I think now the question is, what as a financial service provider can you do to address some of these issues? I think that's the question in our panel. So, well, I mean, if you look at, and this sort of ties back to the question you asked me about what are people doing in response to this crisis, households are doing in response to this crisis when they have not been able to migrate. Well, I think if you look at almost all assessments done in source states, they reveal that, first and foremost, households have had to reduce their consumption levels. This is a pan sort of India sort of observation. And what they've done increasingly is that there's a behavioral shift being observed. And this is something we have seen in interactions with many service providers in rural areas, that people are shifting towards savings or forced savings, emergency savings, where people in the informal sectors, especially migrants, are cutting down their, like I said, their consumption expenditure and are trying to save and smoothen in the process their long-term sort of expenditure patterns. So we are observing this pattern from many of the assessments which have come out, right? The other one is obviously the Indian and the state governments have launched many sort of compensatory programs. And so there's actually an increased demand for such programs, accessing cash from these programs. And so the reliance and demand for these programs has gone up in response to the crisis. The other one, which is surprisingly counterintuitive, but we're seeing it already, is people want to migrate. They want to migrate back. And they've been quite often, because of migration costs, and I'll talk more about in my solutions why this matters so much. But yeah, migration costs and there are barriers to migration which have come up, which are related to the pandemic and what has happened since March. So the three immediate things, that people can do, perhaps that policymakers especially can do, and even providers. One is to restart the trains, quite frankly. I mean, you talk to contractors, you talk to employers. The biggest barrier to people migrating again is the fact that in the major corridors, the trains are not there. And they have to then fly or find other sources which are perhaps more expensive. So the prohibitive costs is a factor. The other thing they can do is, and I think this is more relevant for this panel, is look into reducing remitting costs. When people who have migrated or will migrate will want to send money back, or vice versa, like you said, Fabrizio, households want to send money to migrants also. So perhaps looking into reducing the cost of migration. I know many initiatives speaking on the digital front, perhaps with the agent level channels, looking at the cost of migration, cost of remittances is something worth revisiting. We have seen in international remittances, the World Bank and many of their allies, Nomad, have been campaigning first for 5%, now for 3% across the board remittances, average cost of remittances. And it's been a very successful and a lot of studies showing how much money is unlocked for households back home. So something for us to look at as we deal with this crisis, as households deal with this crisis. And finally, and I think this is a really fundamental issue which needs to be pressed upon more, is that let's get the wages owed to the workers back. A lot of money which they're owed, which they're not being paid, and prevent future delays in payments in their wages. It's a complicated issue. It sounds simple, it's a complicated issue, and there's a lot to do with informal networks and who's an employer, who's not. But it is one of the fundamental issues which could drive up remittances, really, is just people getting paid on time. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Varun, for setting up the stage so well. I think that you touched upon many of the questions that we get into greater detail throughout the discussion. And having said that, I would like to move on to Mr. Ishwaran. So when we talk about remittances and when we talk about domestic migrants, the first thing that we think of. The second thing, maybe, it's India Post. And it's one of the main formal channels for migrants to send money back home. And intuitively, and I think that from what we observed, we can expect that following the lockdown and with the current pandemic, we might expect to see a drop in remittances. And what we wanted to ask you is, where are they picking back up again? And did you manage to observe any trends in sectors or geographic areas that might point to success stories or issues that you might want to bring to the panel and the discussion? Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you, and nice to be a part of this esteemed panel. Okay, before I start, I'd just like to give a brief introduction about India Post Payments Bank. As most of you all know, India Post Payments Bank was set up as part of the Government of India initiative and promoted by the Department of Post, and we use the services of Dakiyas, of the Gramin Dak Sevaks, more like 1,35,000 post offices, and almost 2 lakhs postal agents are part of the operations for India Post Payments Bank. I mean, by leveraging on the India Stack, biometric account opening, and assisted mode of transactions, we have been able to bring down the gap in the access to banking by more than 2.5 times in the country, and possibly we have actually brought down to a banking facility access to less than 5 kilometers today, with the IPBB ops being in full flow. So that's where we stand. And also we have been able to do a lot of penetration in the operations of the Jandan accounts, which got opened almost 5-6 years ago. Most of them were lying inoperative because of non-availability of access to banking services. Though accounts had already been opened. Yeah, coming back to the migrant issues. Yes, true. During lockdown, there was a big surge of migrants moving from the urban cities back home. It was a very pretty sorry sight to see the hordes and hordes of people moving away from their livelihood, dropping off everything, and living back. But one thing which I would like to point out here was the migrant mostly use the remittances mode, the cash remittances, which many of them use the cash-based remittances, or some of them who have bank accounts, they do bank remittances too, where they use a proper banking channels. So today, when I am talking of banking channels, especially from my bank perspective, the IPBB perspective, we saw that there was a drop in the value of the remittances sometime in April and May compared to what was there in the pre-COVID days of March. But that value has started picking up since June, July, and August. So in August, August, September, we have seen a good uptrend of the values, and the numbers have also been steadily rising. Well, the numbers never dropped. So that means that indicates that the value of the transaction has come down. Obviously, because the livelihoods of the people have changed. They have whatever payments or salaries they have been receiving as part of their labors, that's been dropped, and most of them living out of subsidies. So that's what we have seen. So the numbers, I will say the last quarter of the last financial year versus this quarter was more or less stabilized, but the subsequent quarter, which is the July, August, September quarter, has started witnessing a growth upwards, which is a good sign. We have also seen some interesting trends on the originating and the receiver side. Predominantly we used to see all the metro cities like Bombay, Delhi, Chennai, Calcutta, sending the money back out to the destination which are more in Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh. So here also, when we have done analysis where we call the receiver side has also started becoming the originator side. which indicates that like some of the people who have gone back to their places are sending money back to those who are back. Those who are present in the urban areas, or some of the families who have been getting the subsidies have been sending the money back. So there also we have seen some of the uptrends, which we also found it a bit. We found it interesting. So we are actually watching it on how it's happening, because there are people who are moving back from the say locations. I mean the popular locations we can say is the Chapra, Darbhanga, Madhuban, Katihar. These are all the Bihar and then the UP based areas. Motihari for one, as we see. Sagar in MP is another big migrant labor where we have seen people sending money from there back to the urban areas. So it's interesting times here, we will say. And IPPB has been playing a big role out here, because we have also been during the months of April, May, June, we have been organizing specific camps for this at migrant centers, because we observed that many of the migrants are put up in tents on camps at at border posts or at certain clusters. And we could do a lot of work during those times, because unlike other utilities such as food, grocery, or even transportation, logistics, which has always been available at a doorstep processes, banking services was not available as a doorstep feature for most of the banks and most of the people out there. And that's where India Post, which is vast reach using the Department of Post network, really managed to fill those gaps, because most of our offerings are doorstep basis and on an assisted mode. So even if you do not have a mobile phone, a smartphone for that matter, if you have your all you need is your biometrics to be linked to your bank accounts. And not just IPPB customer, any bank customer, if his account is linked to a Aadhaar biometric, we were able to provide a remittance facility, basically cash withdrawal facility, using the Aadhaar enabled payment system. So most of the migrants were serviced using this option during the month of April, May, June, when we organized specific campaigns for them at clusters. So that's the way we have been assisting the migrants. And as I said earlier, we have been witnessing a lot of transactions happening, the reverse also, and those numbers are big, but we are still closely watching the trends. So that's from my side for this.
Thank you so much. We'll have a Q&A session. I'm receiving questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll have a Q&A section at the end. But since I got one that is specifically linked to something that you just said, maybe I'll just follow up on that. I'm being asked, what is the percentage of domestic remittances that this fall in domestic remittances can be quantified in a percentage, at least from what you observed within India Post? And this question is from Komal Bapna from Airtel Payments Bank.
Yeah, we have seen, I'll say, a 40% increase in the count of transaction between last quarter, the last quarter of last financial year, which is the Jan, Feb, March, versus the current half year. So, the 6-month period, almost a 50%, I'll say a 49% transaction increase between the last financial year and the current half year. So that's a big number. So I'm talking about the count. The value, as I told you, dipped in April, May, and started catching up, and the value has also gone up by almost 40%, though it did went down. So that means people have started getting back into their livelihoods. However, the amounts which possibly they are getting is much lower than the wages where they were getting earlier. So that's an inference which we are trying to draw. However, we are still early times. We are still watching this very closely.
Naturally. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So moving on, Sucharita. So Lead and Kaleido have been working together for a long time. And one thing that I've come to appreciate a lot about the work that you guys do is the client centricity that you bring and the product customization that you can bring to the table based on your algorithms and your technology. So maybe after giving a very brief introduction of what Kaleidofin is and what you guys do, can you maybe talk about whether you cater and customize products to different types of migrants, or whether you're thinking about this? Because as Varun has told me many times, when we talk about domestic migrants, they are very different. They are there's a large number of types of domestic migrants, in terms of length of migration, sector of work, skills, and so on and so forth. So whether you manage to do through your platform this kind of customization depending on the type of migrant.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here on this panel. And just to give you a brief introduction to Kaleidofin, and then I'll answer the question about customization and personalization. So we are a neobank, which is really aiming to use finance as a critical tool to make and enable customers really achieve their life's goals. And in some sense, our belief is that overall customers care about their life's goals, they care about their challenges, and words like deposits, mutual funds, loans, investments, insurance, accident insurance, all of these are technical words. People do not come asking for these products because they don't really know what combination of financial products might be helpful to them. And this is not just true for informal sector customers, it's probably true for every single customer. Financial products are sort of seen as a necessary evil. And it's not something you post on Facebook as being really excited about, hey, I just bought a life insurance policy. It just never happens, right? That's what gets people motivated is their life's goals, like education, I want to repair my house, I want to buy a bike. And just to put it into context, the customer segment that Kaleidofin caters to, and we're probably the first fintech to cater to this customer segment, is 100% informal. So we are present in about 10 states and in about 200 districts, and 95% of our customers are women, and over 90% of our customers have household incomes less than 30,000, almost 100% informal. One of the critical aspects of personalization, Fabrizio and Varun, you touched on this as well, is that in general, even without COVID, the kind of volatility that customers experience in the informal segment is huge. Research has shown that income volatility is in the range of anywhere between 45 to 50%. And expense volatility is also around the same number, 40-45%. When you add the two together and say, what does this mean for your surplus? It means that you could, your surplus volatility is actually close to 100%. And therefore, any type of personalization of financial solutions really has to take that into account. The fact that, I might be, in a 5K deficit today, tomorrow I might be plus 10K. And there are pretty significant swings, and that's very hard to manage, right? I mean, you can imagine what if we had to run our life like that. That would be very difficult. And largely what is available to the customers are informal tools. While we don't particularly record customers as migrants or not, what we do have is their lat-long locations via our app, and we do have their addresses from their IDs. And so we can impute that at least, let's say 30% or so of our customers are migrant customers, because they are living in very different locations from their home address, which while we can't say for sure, they may have moved, but very likely that these are migrant customers. And what, the type of personalization we do is the following. We feel that at one level, there are regular risks to customer surplus. A festival happened. Tuition fees need to be paid. This will happen every single year, right? It's not even you're a mason and it's monsoons and you're not getting any work because nobody wants to build in the monsoon season. This is just actually, it's sort of expected predictability. So what we do is we actually combine regular savings, a credit line, and insurance to protect against big risks. The regular savings is largely done via an algorithm. So we do a real-time financial health assessment just to assess what kind of investment is actually good for you. Do you need complete liquidity? There are many schemes, for example, that LIC offers, which are very popular with our customer base, which are completely illiquid. They cannot touch the money, and you have to ask the question that was that product suitable for the customer, given that every other month there is about 80 to 100% volatility. So what we do is actually take those factors into account to say that, how much, what is this customer's holding period? Is it 2 months? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? What is this customer's financial health? And choose the right type of investment. We have a credit line that is available to the customer at any time, which helps to smooth out predictable shocks. These are like the tuition fees and monsoons, which happen every year with regularity. It's still a problem to be handled. Sort of like a secured credit card of sorts. I have saved 10,000. I can access a credit line of 8,000 at any point of time, no questions asked. This credit line is also cheaper because it's secured by their savings, much, much cheaper than the formal sector loan they would otherwise get. The third one is, big risks that are completely outside your control. This would be like the pandemic. It could be, serious accidents, deaths, natural catastrophes, which you really cannot control and which you really have to buy protection, buy insurance against, because you have absolutely no control over their occurrence. So we, combine savings, credit, and insurance in such a way that customers actually get to their life's goals. Some of our customers say that, okay, so if something happens to me, will my daughter still go to college? And the thing is, if that answer is yes, that's when, they've understood that, that's what insurance is about. Right? Because something could happen to you. I mean, could happen to any of us. That's just life. It's a game of probability. So, what we've done is tried to combine this, and these various combinations are predicted by our algorithm. But we also have a pretty, huge assistance network, because we don't believe that this journey can happen without assistance. So it's not just about having a good machine that makes the right predictions. Mr. Ishwaran also said that for this customer base, network like India Post is critical. Like that, we've tied up with many customer-facing networks so that assistance can be provided, that conversation can be had, that guidance can be provided, and also the nudge and the motivation is constantly there. So it's sort of, a tech with touch model. We wanted to take, the judgment out of the equation. Because we believe that it's hard to train field force for good judgment on financial well-being. It's really, really hard. We've tried it out and it doesn't, I don't believe it works. Better to let a machine do it, better to let it be supervised. And for migrants in particular, what we've seen during this crisis is that we saw some liquidation pressures. We saw a lot of customers called us. So we have local language call centers, and we also have local language automated voice messages. So we informed all our customers that you have personal accident, disability, and life insurance of X amount, 50,000, 100,000 available to you. Because what happens is customers forget, like I'm sure some of us might have bought insurance. Like how many of us know that there's insurance on our credit cards? Not many people know, right? You don't keep track of that kind of thing. So we thought that let's reach out to our customers and make sure that if something happens, they at least know that they have an insurance policy, they can claim it. That is a significant amount of money that would be very useful. So in response to those voice messages, we actually got a lot of incoming calls asking about, okay, how much money do I have? How much insurance is there? How do I get the money out? How many days will it take? So for example, it takes 1 business day and the money gets credited back into their bank account. We had surprisingly fewer amount of liquidations. Most of the liquidations came from urban centers and urban customers. So rather than customers who were working much more in remote rural areas, there we didn't see as much liquidation pressure. We've seen that our average balances went from 7,000 to under 6,000 and are now in August and September slowly climbing back. We've also been tracking the data on just working hours. And we've seen that, whereas in April and May, especially in urban centers, it has pretty much dipped to zero. In July and August, it came back to about 50% of normal working hours, which is still a pretty big shock. But given that we also saw in our own customer survey that customers had cut consumption pretty drastically, especially of course, all discretionary expenses were cut out, but even things like, eggs, milk, meat. So people were largely having pulses and rice from what we could see. And of course, that is much cheaper. So I think somehow, customers were managing by cutting consumption fairly drastically, but, we worry that some of this is harmful as well. And therefore, how can we make sure that emergency credit is available to tide over the 6 months and that is necessary? So I think cutting consumption by almost 80% almost feels dangerous, that this will have a lasting impact on your family and on the well-being of your family. Yeah. So so I think that from our perspective, we saw that urban centers were much more highly affected, and the insurance came in handy during the crisis. So did the credit line. But very few people actually liquidated the savings. People chose to say that, okay, let me stick to my goal and let me use the line instead.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. And sheds a lot of adds a lot of information, and I think a lot of background and light to the issue. And particularly, I think that a big takeaway is that we are seeing that urban centers obviously are more affected by the situation, and therefore migrants working in urban centers. But with Sona, I wanted to add a gender layer to the conversation, because first of all, the migration choices among female and male economic migrants are different to begin with. So maybe we can start from that sort of a COVID agnostic situation. And specifically whether the remittances and remittance targets play a role in play a different role in determining migration choices among female and male migrants. And I also then wanted to introduce, obviously, since we're talking about the effect of the pandemic, whether you have observed or you're aware of studies and research that have looked into the whether female migrant workers have coped differently with the loss of income and with the crisis that has been faced by their households differently than their male counterparts, and whether you could also chip in explaining this difference.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Fabrizio, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. Thanks to bringing this interesting part to the discussion, because so far it was going in a direction talking about gender agnostic migration patterns and talking about issues that does not affect, affects migrant workers, but does not have the layer of gender. And this is a very sensitive chord where you touch, Fabrizio, because when you talk about female migrant workers, especially the domestic migrants, the internal migrants, as we call them, in India, the issue is about a lot of invisibilization around women migrants. They are not really recognized as workers. If we go by the official statistics, that's the government statistics, which is very old because the migration survey was conducted around 12 years ago, and that was the last survey. 80% of women migrants were the reasons cited for the migration by 80% of women migrants were relegated to the choice of a marriage. So basically, marriage was one of the reasons which basically motivated the migration choice of women, and that is not an economic decision. That really comes from a social tradition. However, if we move out of this official statistics jargons and the official statistic baggages, what we find is from the independent NGO studies is that women, however, do migrate for economic reasons, the reasons that Varun had started by talking about, that migration for development. And we could see, I was involved in a study in 2012 for a pan-India women's migration surveys, and more than 60% of our sample of 3,000 women migrants showed that women were migrating for economic reasons, especially reasons which motivated their migration patterns was related to poverty, deprivation, and exclusion at their sources. So, of course, there is a very important aspect of economic reason that gets lost and invisibilized in the official statistics, where most of the migration motivation cited by women come as marriage, which is not something, something that one invisibilizes the entire agency of a women migrant worker, and two, it somehow devalues the contribution of women migrant workers in terms of not only contributing to the economy, but also to the remittances that are received and by their households, by their source in the households at the sources. Now, that is something that I wanted to highlight as a first point. The second important thing that I wanted to highlight in this whole matter was the sectors to which women choose to migrate. Now, there are several types of migration that takes place among the women as it takes place among all migrants. Within women, we find the short-term seasonal migration, which is more or less rural to rural, happens in agriculture, happens in brick kilns, happens in salt pans, happens in all the manual construction sectors. And there is a medium to long-term migration, which is basically a migration that Varun had also touched upon, and which basically evolves the woman migrant worker and provides a better quality of life and better earning capacity to the woman. And those are into the urban and industrial corridors, and those are medium to long-term migration patterns for women. Now, those are essentially into services like beauticians, massage, salon, it is also about construction, it is also about women domestic workers. Now, and these occupations, why I'm emphasizing, are very important to understand, because these are the major sectors of concentration of women migrant workers. And most of these, as you see, especially the rural to rural migrations, are low paid, low remunerated sectors, where often what we find is that either women basically reside on two sides of the spectrum, where women either send all the money earned as remittances back home, or they do not send any remittance at all because they are not able to, and that is because of the low levels of earnings. On the other hand, the medium to long-term migration into the urban industrial corridors as factory workers, especially in the garment sectors, or as domestic workers, or as beauticians and salon workers, there is the data. Our data showed that around 68% of the women migrant in these sectors were able to send 70% of their earnings back home. And this, I'm talking about a study which was almost 8 years ago. That has, in the last 2-3 years, if we look at the speed of women's migration from rural to urban corridors, that has increased magnificently. And right now, if we see that there are more than 1 million women migrant to the urban areas, and out of those, there is a whole chunk of women who send remittances back home. Now, what has happened to that in the COVID situation is one very important thing, that most of these sectors, especially the beauticians, the parlors, the salon services, the massage services that women migrant workers provide, and also the domestic workers, these are all very touch-heavy occupations. And because they are touch-heavy occupations, what happened essentially in COVID is most of these women workers have lost their jobs for a very long time. And it has been very difficult for them to return to work. We have found this true for the domestic workers. For the longest time, women domestic workers were vilified as the spreaders of COVID, while we have not seen any evidence so far that women domestic workers were the source of any infection, but yet they were vilified in the urban centers, in the urban residential enclaves, and that has affected their incomes. What has happened in that is how they have coped with it is that given women's spending patterns are significantly different from how men spend on their consumption, women over and above in addition to sending remittances, they are also able to accumulate some assets for themselves even at the destination where they stay. And that kind of asset that they accumulated over the past few years, showed a high rate of depletion in this entire COVID period because they had lost their jobs. I am not aware of any study which focuses entirely on women migrant workers in COVID, but one thing I would like to highlight is that the invisibilization of women migrants as workers is also due to a third category of women who migrate with the migrant groups as assistants for care providers, for care services. And those women, although they are traveling with the migrant groups for economic reasons, are often remain invisibilized due to the kind of service that they provide to the labor groups, and their activities remain invisible in the entire economic sphere. There are no available services, welfare or benefits for these kinds of migrant women. And very few women construction workers, migrant workers, and this has come up in some of the media reports that were there, that very few women migrant workers are actually registered by the Board of Construction Workers. And since they remain unregistered, a lot of the announcements which were made up as relief by the government for migrant workers escaped the women migrants. So for me, if you ask me, I would say that remittance products, yes, definitely. that should be there, which would be incentivizing more women to be able to access remittances at the source. But for women migrants in the urban centers, there has to be migrant products for women separately. And those migrant products should also provide not only facilities for sending remittances or receiving remittances. Those products should be able to provide women with access to all the government benefits, to access to all the welfare measures announced by the government. I will stop at that.
Thank you so much, Sona. That was really interesting. Just a question from our from the audience. In the study that you cited at the beginning of your intervention, what is the percentage of women migrants that migrated with their families, so not alone? Did you have that kind of information? You're muted right now, just FYI.
We did, yes. Sorry. Yes, we did collect that kind of information. It was basically the CWDS study that I was part of briefly as a research assistant those days. And we did have information on the number of women, I mean the percentage of women traveling, and if I remember correctly, around 50 to 50% of women traveled with families, especially as jodis, into contractual work in brick kilns and other similar kind of occupations.
Thank you. So I think that so far we have done mostly two things in this discussion. We have established sort of the lay of the land pre-COVID and post-COVID, or rather, I should say, during COVID. And we've discussed, trends in remittances, and also we touched upon coping strategies. We talked about insurance, we talked about liquidation requests, we talked about remittances being sent back from families to their households. Which shows really the resilience of the group, of this vulnerable group, even in the face of adversity. But I would like to ask the panel to reflect on more of the side of going back to work. So on resumption of remittances. So I'd like to gauge your opinions, obviously from the lenses of your respective organization and lines of work, on financial products that could help migrants return to work, on the issue of the cost of migration and the barriers to migration during COVID. Ishwaran, would you like to start us off with that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was actually very, very interesting to hear Sucharita on the good work done on reminding this migrant customers about the insurance with there, and what she said was perfectly right. Most of us, even we don't remember what kind of insurance we have taken and what are the facilities or features which are available. So that's a good thing done. And also I like to also specifically mention Sona Mitra on this, on the work done on the women migration migrants, and also on the need for the migrant products. I mean, specifically for the migrant product designed for migrants and for the women migrants especially. That's a good thing which for me it's a good takeaway from the bank perspective. We'll see what we can also work on this. Good ideas to work on. Yeah. Coming back to this, when we say while we have been talking of a long-term migrant or a short-term migrant, specifically we have not classified anyone as a specific migrant type. That's something, I mean, very deep drilling which we have not done. However, currently the products which we offer are the account management system, which is more for the savings account, current account, the money transfers, Aadhaar enabled payment systems, which are all used by the migrant as well as all the other customers. Going forward, especially, I mean, as part of the bank roadmap, and we'll also design specific for this migrants, especially with the COVID coming as a big learning for all of us, the entire world actually. We will be launching our own micro credit, micro loans for this kind of segments. Insurance we have already launched, but we'll be launching some sort of micro insurance, especially for this kind of segments. And for these kind of segments, I mean, investments and savings, and also, I mean, some of the products on investment and savings, and more importantly, we want to enable digital literacy for all these segments, because these segments, as we have seen, I mean, this kind of a pandemic in fact brought everybody to their knees, and this segment are the one which get affected, because their livelihood entirely depends on some of the work which happens in urban areas or even rural areas. And when the entire work shuts down, they have no means of knowing what to do and how to carry on with their lives. So a digital literacy program jointly with some of these agencies is what we have also planned. Some of the other things which we also, which will be rolling out, again, may not be very specific, but will be used by many of this, is the Aadhaar enrollment, because many of the people, when they lose their mobile numbers or want to change their mobile numbers in Aadhaar, they find it difficulty. So we will be launching a doorstep based also for this kind of segments on assisted mode, which will really which we feel can be a great help to such segments. And Aadhaar seeding enrollment. Other thing which we saw was many of the the government has been issuing subsidies. It was possibly not reaching 100% at the last mile, because many of the accounts were not seeded correctly. So that's a campaign which we are embarking on, the need to push up the Aadhaar seeding in a big way, so that the affected citizens do get the real benefits. So these are our roadmaps, and so that's we will be working on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that I can speak for everyone, saying that I'm really looking forward to seeing these developments. These new products for these for these customer segments. And then, Sucharita, I'd like to let you also talk about maybe plans for the future, and this issue of the role that organizations and think tanks can play to support migrants return, if that's what they want to do, to their destination place of work.
Yeah. So just a couple of thoughts here. One, what we saw during the period of April to September was that, including for our partner institutions, is that even lending institutions with access to liquidity stopped lending completely, even post the national lockdown. And lender confidence completely disappeared. And so it's a little bit, what happens in these crises is that it's a double whammy. It's not just the impact of COVID. You used to get credit, and now even the normal sources of credit are not available anymore. So what we did was actually we worked with few of our partners to reuse our financial health assessment algorithm, turn it into a credit and underwriting algorithm, because at the end of the day, the surplus of the customer can be used for saving or for taking new loans and repaying them. And we partnered with 3 such institutions, one Gujarat-based, one UP Bihar-based, one Tamil Nadu-based, to really say that, okay, let's try and ensure that who your top 80% customers are, because it was the choice between nothing, 0 for 100% of the customers versus let's give credit to 80% of the topmost deserving customers. And we used one of our products called Chi-Score, which learned a lot from our financial health algorithm to really underwrite customers individually. For example, in the microfinance sector, where underwriting has typically been done only in groups. And we think that this individual level underwriting is important to have individual access to credit. All of us, I'm sure treasure this capacity to be able to borrow individually. We don't have to depend on our friends, neighbors, etc. And I think every customer should have that. So what this did, Fabrizio, was that it actually did release access to credit. It's a drop in the ocean. I know that. What we did is small in comparison to what is required, but it's an approach that can be replicated. Lender confidence is still low. Disbursements are still abysmally small. And how do we get it back? Better underwriting models which can also underwrite different types of loan products, promote loan product innovation, could be part of the answer. One, other product that we are working on, which is through our corporate program. So we tie up with a whole lot of call centers, factories, to work with their customers to introduce financial wellness programs for them. They typically actually see a lot of migrants coming in. And one of the big problem statements that we got was, how do we get the housing deposit? Because you need a place to live. And for example, I live in Chennai, people ask for 6 to 10 months housing deposit. And then how do you come up with that, 50, 60,000 rupees upfront? Customers, simply don't have the money. And what we thought was that a program where we could tie up with a corporate, because this person actually has a job, to provide an advance which is specifically meant for to pay for the housing deposit, would actually encourage people to come back, because the risk is not that high as long as the person continues to work with that organization. The corporate can be pulled into the picture. The payroll can also be pulled into the picture. And this is, we know it's a need across the board. People simply don't know how to come up with this initial lump sum of money. And I think this would have a significant bearing on assisting migration, which, like Varun said, Mr. Ishwaran said, is much required. We are also working on, a health insurance product, which actually protects against the loss of income. Nowadays, hospitalization is also very common. There is a huge amount of anxiety about health as such, and number of working days lost directly translates into loss of income. So what this product does is really protect you against the income lost on the days that you couldn't get to work. So those are the couple of products that we have on the anvil that could help and enable migration.
Thank you, Sucharita. That was really interesting. And Shona, when we talk about financial products and remittances and women, one thing that comes to my mind is the issue of financial decision making in the household, which is connected to things like economic empowerment, for example. So I would like to get your general thoughts on this, and more specifically about a potential maybe remittance product with a labeling or a earmarking feature, which would allow both the migrant and maybe the household, the receiving party in the household, to express a preference on how remittances should be spent. Is that something that you think would contribute to women's economic empowerment? Is that something that is absolutely pointless, maybe? Or what would you recommend to for financial institutions to think about to make remittance products more empowering for women, both migrants and at the household level?
Yes, Fabrizio, going back to your first question, I think on the financial empowerment or decision making by women on receiving remittances, when women are recipients of remittances, when there is some good and some bad news, in the sense that the good news would be that whenever women are the recipients of the remittances, the spending patterns keep changing, and this is something that shows in the data, a lot of data, whether large-scale data sets, whether government or non-government, it shows that women's spending decisions are governed by the needs of the household, the family, and children. And that is kind of not only empowering for the, that is not only welfare of the family, but it is also empowering for the woman who takes care of the household. But the bad news on this front is also that some of the migration studies have shown us that migrant workers' families operate on a joint family basis at the source. And in a joint family, the remittances are often received by the male members of the household. And the women in the household or the female members of the household do not really have access to the remittances. So there is so that there wouldn't be any, question of that kind of empowerment which we are talking about as women when they are recipients of remittances. On the other hand, the amount of remittance that is sent by the women migrant workers from the destinations, it matters only when they are substantial. But the sectors or the occupations that I highlighted are the ones which are often very low paid and do not really have a lot of substance when it is sent as remittances. Although if you take all of it together, it is a large amount of money, but individually, it really does not have, that kind of value or substance. And therefore, that is also one bit that is a little worrying. I would suggest that there are, in terms of remittance products, one is that what the India Post Bank Payments Bank is doing, that is doorstep. Anytime, whenever there is a doorstep facility for receiving remittances, it helps women because they do not have to travel, or they don't have to travel to access banks or any other financial institution for accessing the remittances. So that is one definitely an important step. The other barrier that women face in accessing remittances, even when we have good products, is the digital and financial exclusion that women face constantly. So the digital exclusion, the barrier for digital exclusion, and I think, Fabrizio, you're very well placed yourself to know, given your work and experience, that the kind of digital exclusion that women face, that we have to begin from a really low level. And to include women, there has to be a digital infrastructure in place, and there has to be a whole push for skilling women into using that digital infrastructure and motivating them to use it, because often women do not own smartphones, do not have access to smart gadgets, and they do not have access, they are also intimidated often by the whole prospect of being able to use platforms. So I think that is the digital exclusion part becomes one of the biggest barriers, even when we have gender sensitive remittance products. And I think, yes, I would like to reiterate that doorstep facilities for remittance payments are always better. And it would be great if there are products which are designed where accessibility is only by women of the household. I know that is difficult to achieve, or that may sound very irrational to begin with. Often because sensibilities in rural households are very different from how we think in the other parts of the country. So that may be, but can be started from there. So yeah, I just had a little bit to say on this.
Thank you, Sona. Thank you so much, actually. And I saw that Sucharita was agreeing with you on your last point. And
I just wanted to say how much I agree with you, Sona. Some of our customers, when they save, they of course would like doorstep service because they are earning and conducting their business as well from their house or very close to their house, but also they want complete confidentiality in saving. They don't, so very often the smartphone is owned by the husband, and but they still will not install the app, and they will say that no, I will get the SMS on my feature phone, and that's okay. And in fact, please do not send any information to my husband, because I want to keep it that way, and which is fine, and we should completely respect that. But it's actually a requirement, a specific requirement, this confidentiality requirement, even from your immediate family, is actually quite a big one that we need to weave into the product experience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sucharita. Varun, so going back to the issue of financial products for resuming migration, I think that you might want to talk a little bit about that. But if you could also touch a little bit about the issue of formal and informal channels of migration, whether you think that following the pandemic we'll see a greater uptake of formal remittances services rather than informal, like Hawala networks and these kind of things.
Yeah, so just a bit of context about what the work we've been incubating, basically a business correspondent agent network for migrants at IMN. That's been our business initiative in the last 1 year. And in fact, between December, we had started a pilot, our first pilot on a construction site in Thane, where the idea was, as everybody suggested, and it's fantastic to hear, this idea of doorstep service. So what we did was we offered, from my research, it became apparent, especially construction workers on big organized sites, but even smaller sites, they can't leave the site. They come there, they're on the site. They will be next to a bank. In fact, this site we were working was next to a bank branch, right? They would never go there. They would build the bank branch, but never use that bank, right? So we realized that agent has to go to the site. And to access the site, you need to have some kind of partnership with the employer, with the construction company, with the subcontractors, and so on. So we did that. We did that work, and our pilot. I was the agent. I personally signed up to be an agent. I was on that site, and I was offering personally those services. And the services we offered were remittances, cash in, cash out. We were offering a micro insurance product. We were offering a savings product. We partnered with the fintech company for that. And we started working. And one of the things we realized very rapidly is that KYC, right, for a lot of migrant workers is a big problem. They're all keen. The demand, what this pilot was successful, right? Before the pilot got disrupted by COVID, but because it was kind of supposed to go on post-March, but got disrupted. But before that, the demand was clear, right? The good news is that they are definitely interested in these products. The problem was a lot of people, and on a big construction site, it was a major construction site, there were people from 8 different states doing different kinds of things, right? And all of them had unique issues with documentation. Aadhaar address is wrong, right? The most popular service was updating the Aadhaar, by far, which was not something we signed up for. We had to update our pilot, partner with a bank branch, and literally take people to the bank, because we couldn't do it on the site. We literally take them to the bank branch and walk them through that process, which is not scalable. But we did that for the purposes of the pilot. And so, I mean, when we talk about services for migrants and the informal sector on large, I think this is something we need to keep in mind, is that a lot of, updating the address, you want a PAN card so they can make investments, right? So that PAN card has to be synced with the Aadhaar card. The moment there's a discrepancy, KYC fails. So getting that right? And the moment you start doing that, they're like, my father's name is wrong in this address. Can you fix that? I'm telling you, personally, I updated about 60 Aadhaar cards. I learned all about Aadhaar updation, and it was incredible. And I kept thinking, how large is this problem? This is just one construction site, right? And I think this is the biggest barrier in so many ways for us signing up for these great ideas that we're hearing. And I think for us, so the other lesson for us, and this touches upon your informal sector point, is why are people doing, relying on the informal networks, right? And how, what does that mean, relying on informal networks? Well, in the context of remittances, I would say two things. One, often, especially if you're, let's say you're a new first-time migrant. So on a construction site, we've managed to map out the different skill sets and map out different kind of migrants and different kind of areas they were coming from, the service we did. So a helper would typically be the lowest skilled person, right? And usually a new person, maybe first year in their migration. And this person is new to the town. He's never encountered formal services, right? So for him to remit money, he will always go to someone who's more experienced, like a supervisor, someone who brought him over, right? He will rely on that person. In fact, he will rely often on that person to hold his money. He's like the informal deposit account they have. And by the way, on deposit account, I think this is worth a digression. They would have an account. All of them have Jan Dhan accounts, but they would always say, "Ki shehar mein, in the city, we don't have an account." But somehow, like the idea that one account is sufficient was not there. They would want a city account. That's actually a matter of pride to have an account in the city. That was something that became very apparent. Anyways, going back to remittances, there would be a group of them. They would group based on linguistics and or based on where they're coming from, and they would give it to one person who would do the remittances for them, right? And that's one way how informal sectors work. The other is the contractor. My God, the most important person on the site is the contractor. By far, he is the safe more than anybody else. He is the main man, right? And this person holds the money. He provides them housing. The good and bad, all is happening, but he's their main financial point, right? So, so for us, the pilot was a real experience. We had all these ideas and we tested them, and a lot of them were debunked. But the great thing was it taught us about the next pilot, which we're starting in a couple of weeks in the Bundelkhand Delhi corridor this time. And one of the lessons we learned was, any agent network, and this is both a product perspective, but also for us, it's an access thing, right? We're providing access. We're not focusing so much on product, but it's more access. And so for us, we're creating this network both at source and destination. And we're taking, and this is a lesson from migration studies, which is focus on the household. Take the migration household as a whole and make your access service, your access network dedicated to each household. And a part of that household, of course, as Sona mentioned, are women migrants and also women left behind. And so they're also, Chinmay Tumbe done a lot of work out of IIM Ahmedabad on this. He's called it the feminization of Indian agriculture, where men are just disappeared. I've seen it in my own surveys. I go there, there's no men to surveys, it's women. And why have they migrated, right? So that actually is an opportunity in so many ways to drive up, women's financial inclusion. Because when we talk about remittances, we only focus on quite often on the sending part, but what about the receiving, right? And the receiving experience actually can quite often drive up customer engagement with your platform and divert that focus from Hawala Hundi to the formal remittances. Because what the Hawala Hundi experience is much more smoother on that front, because it kind of works well for both sending and receiving, right? But if formal services can have that source destination, that lens, which Hawala Hundi does already by design, I think you can divert a lot of people, because I think it is much more reliable and much more scalable, right? So and so for us to be building this network, part of the also another lesson was that the kind of services they need at destination are very different at source. They don't carry their documents to destination. They'll have their Aadhaar, maybe the PAN if you issue it there, but a lot of other documents, they're not there. So you have to do a lot of the onboarding at source and kind of understand that they're migrating. And then they're different. Sona was great because she talked about different kinds of migrants. And I think that's another thing, is different kinds of migrants, long-term, short-term, different skill sets, different destinations will have different preferences in terms of kind of products they want and services they want. And I think that's another thing in the pilot we want to further explore. And it's starting, and post Diwali we'll start our services. And the final thing I would mention, and this touches back to your formal point, is who's the agent, right? And so I think for us, the one of the main innovations, so to say, for us is really in a pilot, really working with contractors as agent, experienced migrants as agents, increasing capacity. So if someone is just doing cash in, cash out, let's get them trained into delivering, cross-selling insurance. So really working with them on that front. So really sort of tapping into and exploring different kind of agents, both as source and destination. And we have NGO partners and using NGO people who have been serving in different capacities in those villages for a long time, training them as financial agents, right? So these are sort of things in our pilots that we're trying and seeing if the uptake is there, and yeah, we'll learn more as the pilot goes. But yeah, just want to share that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Varun. So we'll spend the rest of the time that we have answering questions from the audience. We have received a lot, some very interesting, some very detailed questions. So I have to apologize to everybody in advance because we will not be able to go through all of them. But we'll definitely go through some of them. And one that caught my eye is from Professor Agarwal from the University of Manchester. That is asking whether any of the panelists has been looking into the impact of, apologize for butchering the pronunciation of the Garib Kalyan Rozgar Yojana that was launched in June, I think, in 6 states to guarantee the employment of returning migrants. So this is a question for any of the panelists that would like to pick that up, if that's something that you've been looking at.
I'm happy to answer. We've been looking at a lot of, so I think the great thing about some of the responses to COVID is we've seen a lot of rapid assessments. A lot of NGOs, a lot of large institutions, and governments even have stepped up and done a lot of assessments on the impact of the COVID. So we have a nice, starting from late March to even now, assessments continue. And I think, and one of the common questions you will see any rapid assessment is, social benefits. Like, are you applying for it? Are you getting it? To what extent are you relying on it? And Ishwan sir, he touched upon that. He talked about how accessing benefits is something even they want to explore. And that's, again, one of the service our agents will be also providing. And I think the issue there is a lot of people have not been able to access the benefits. And part of the thing is, and part of the reason is that, for those who were at destination in the beginning, and this was touched upon by Sona in related to women migrants, but it's true for a lot of migrants, that the announcements, they were not even aware of it. So when we did the assessments in April and May, people were not aware of it. In fact, part of the assessment, help became an option, right? We had to tell them, oh, you're not aware of it here. You should be aware of this, right? But awareness is one. Then they have to onboard themselves into, these benefits. So I think awareness and then assistance in terms of onboarding, I think remains a challenge, and it's come through from a lot of assessments that sort of highlighted this point. And this was especially true at destinations for migrants, right? So I know in Chennai, a lot of Bihari migrants, when announcements were made about COVID and some of the measures made, they were not aware of it because the language issue was there, right? So like one of the design features we advocate is, understand like the language factor, like, make sure that if you meet a migrant worker from Bihar in the South, for instance, factor in the language. Don't just offer them services in the local language because they won't understand. So, some of these issues came up, and I think as a result, people were forget signing up, were not even aware of the benefits. But the good news is, is that people are becoming aware. Part of it is just necessity, right? Because they really need these compensatory programs that governments are putting up. They really need them to maintain their consumption levels. So I think there's a great demand for them. So I think anybody, and you look at the uptake with the CSC centers, you talk to, those agents, they'll say the demand has been never better. I wonder if some of the uptake we see in remittances, smaller transaction, but higher volume is some of these benefits. I wonder about that. So demand is there, but I think in terms of onboarding and finally, like money's in your account, how do you cash out? And this goes back to that point of door-to-door services and cash out points. That's another thing which came up quite a bit, at least in our surveys, and some of the assessments have sort of confirmed that. So yeah, so I think that would be my response to that.
Thank you. Not sure whether any other panelist wants to chip in on the same point of this program. Otherwise, one issue that came up in the Q&A and also during the whole discussion is this issue of awareness, information sharing, and really bringing this information, what is the best way to bring this information to migrants. And the question I'm getting is mostly to Ishwaran and Sucharita, and it's on the role of agents and technology, phones, both smartphones and feature phones, in bringing information about financial products designed specifically maybe for migrants to their intended audience. So maybe Ishwaran, if you want to weigh in on this to begin with.
Yeah, thank you so much. In fact, I can't agree more with what Mr. Varun, Sucharita, and Sona had said earlier on some of the challenges also being faced out here. In fact, what we do is the information campaigns we do through our agents who are the Dakiyas, the postmen. If you see, postmen have been the most, a known face in a village or in any city for that matter. I mean, these are our primary utility service. Our part of our life. Where say we know postmen, the policemen. They are people whom people know very well, and they are the trusted person, because he's the one who brings us the good tidings. He's the person who brings us all the information from outside. So Dakia is a household person. In fact, we use the postal network to spread the information, because we organize camps at many of the places or clusters to create information. We have made the Dakia, the postman also financial literate. So that's the first level which we made on the banking services. They were financial literate, no doubt on that. On the banking services, some of the complex products which are available, like say Aadhaar enabled systems or a money transfer or remittances are a bit complex, because there is a fair amount of authentication, which is again the biometric which we use. So there is a training to be done. So we have made him or her as a financial literate, and then he drills it down to the next level through the camps. Of course, we also use technology such as SMSs and all those things, but again, those may or may not reach the end customer always, and the person may not be able to read and comprehend, because people I mean, you get so many messages in a day, so it's not very easy. And also our assisted model works a lot, helps a lot, because it is especially for the women population, like the panelists rightly said, they don't have feature phones. They don't have smartphones. They don't have access to the to smartphones. It is held by the male dominated society, unfortunately. So we offer doorstep banking with on the smartphone, assisted model. Confidentiality is also there, affordability is there. Confidentiality is because it's a biometric which is being used. The person doesn't have to share his or his data outside. So these are the way we create information campaigns, we create awareness, and try to create inclusions for the entire society. However, long way to go. Because again, as I saw, COVID has thrown a lot of learnings for each one of us. I mean, all of us thought that things will go off, we are better equipped, but still learnings are there, and we are trying to build technologies, algorithms into it, so that we are able to keep bettering the services. Thank you.
Just thank you, Mr. Ishwaran. Just wanted to add just a couple of points. I think the digital literacy initiative that you talked about is really very important. In that, what we see is, for example, UPI has been such a huge success, but still largely limited to, urban smartphone owning male customers. And the thing is that it's because also we've done a lot of work around trying to activate UPI for many of our customers. And we realized that there are 4 conditions you need to have. You need to have your bank account seeded with your mobile number. You need to have your Aadhaar linked to your mobile number. You talked about the Aadhaar seeding. You need to have a working debit card. And you need to have the PIN of the debit card. Now, that's a lot of conditions. If you meet all of those conditions, and all of those conditions, for example, are true for people in this panel, but it's highly likely that one of them is not true for the customer base, especially for women, even more so. So I think this digital literacy initiative is a really important way to say, you know, can banks spearhead a campaign to put this infrastructure in place? Because it's really unfortunate that we, you know, have such a fantastic technology, but because this sort of link is broken, and you know, it's somehow very difficult, right? Varun also said, very difficult to establish any of these links. If we really launch a nationwide campaign and rope in all the banks, said, let's get this done, I really think, and I know this entails cost, but I do think that it will get much more participation, because this sort of 5-point project is not easy for the customer to do themselves.
Thanks, Sucharita. In fact, I just wanted to mention that we offer assisted UPI also, and there's no need for a debit card out there. So that's, I mean, I just wanted to begin. Yes, but UPI is complex. I fully agree with you. But so that's something we have actually eased the life for some of the people out there.
No, that's great. Actually, would love to talk.
Thanks so much.
That's great. I'm going to just, since we are slightly over time, I'm just going to ask one related question to Shona. We talked about systems and barriers and simplifying things. What are, if you were to identify like 1 or 2 main barriers for women migrants in accessing and sending remittances, what would they be, and what could we do to ease them?
I think I will repeat myself, Fabrizio. I think a lot of it is about intimidation faced by women in terms of accessing banks, and now in terms of accessing the applications based on the smartphones. Earlier, the experiences of women remittances, women workers sending remittances was they would send it through banks, through post office, but mostly they would carry it themselves when they returned. Right now, in the changed context where we have the digital infrastructure which is available for sending in money and kind and cash transfers, I think women need the digital literacy mission, which I would echo Sucharita, and I would also echo everybody here. In fact, all of us make the same point that if you want to include women, they have to be digitally made more literate, and that's a humongous task, because one has to reduce the intimidation that women have, that is kind of a social behavior, and second, you have to really provide them with the device to be able to access the entire digitization.
Thank you, Sona. So with this, we are concluding our webinar. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of the panelists again for the participation and for their insights. I think that the conversation has been interesting, insightful, and I have to say that the most important and the thing that struck me the most is the passion and the interest and that I've seen emerging from all of the panelists on finding solutions and new products and new approaches to overcome some of the issues that became apparent in the past few months. And I'm really excited to hear back in a few months, hopefully, about what has been done so far. And I hope that maybe through this webinar, new ideas and new partnerships might have been sparked. And having said that, also thanks to Access for facilitating and organizing this. And I'm passing the baton to Radhika for closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Fabrizio, for, of course, partnering with us, and also the wonderful facilitation of this panel. The panel itself, I think these are like really interesting and insightful discussions. And I think the panel covered quite a range of issues and gaps, and also not just those, but also looking at some products, solutions. Of course, there are issues of scale somewhere, and we need to take them up at some scale through replication. And the issue of literacy and awareness, of course, stands across all kinds of discussions when we talk about financial inclusion, and that needs, I guess, a much larger government and intervention. But thank you so much. I'd like to mention, Fabrizio mentioned this a little bit initially. This we are working in partnership with CFI and Axion's Financial Inclusion Week that is going on currently. And this webinar, the recording of this webinar will be immediately posted on their portal, and will be accessible to all the participants of Financial Inclusion Week as well. Thank you so much, all of you, Ishwaran, Varun, Sona, and Sucharita, for this wonderful conversation, and we look forward to being in touch with you separately as well. Thanks again, Fabrizio. And with this, I'd like to close. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.